Hi everyone, welcome to the Empower Sounds podcast. My name is Mahika, and on today's episode of the podcast, we are interviewing the lovely Sharena Shiv. Sharena is the founder of Devotion Property Management, but also the host of Start Up Start Now podcast, a global 1% podcast that interviews founders such as Stephen Bartlett, the founder of Gymshark, and so many more on their entrepreneurial journey to success and how they got there. And Sharena is going to be sharing her journey with us today. I hope that you take away from today's interview that this is your sign to start what you have been wanting to do, the thing that you've been procrastinating or too scared to do or too busy to do. Start it now, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Rate and review the show if you like it, and please reach out on the podcast Instagram. I will link it down below. But enjoy, and that's it from me. Amazing. Well, Sharena, welcome to the Empower Sounds podcast. Can you please start by introducing yourself?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today. A little bit about me. My name is Sharena. I'm from Exeter in Devon originally. I run a business called Devotion Property Management down in Exeter, and I also have a podcast show called Start Up Start Now, where I interview British entrepreneurs about their journeys into business. And also just finished the London Marathon last week, and yeah, really excited to be with you today and hopefully share as much inspiration and wisdom as possible.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to dive in. Anyways, before we talk about your business that you run and your podcast, I wanted to talk about the journey of how you started that business. So let's start with your university because you kind of went through an unconventional route. So what motivated you to pursue a degree in business and management at Aston University? And how did your experiences there shape your understanding of entrepreneurship and business and pave the way for the rest of the future?
Amazing. So I come from Exeter in Devon. If you look at the map of the UK, it's that bit right at the bottom, where growing up, I think the statistic was 99.7% white. I'm Indian. Of Indian origins. My family are originally from South Africa and Kenya, and they go back generations to North India and Punjab, just to kind of give you an idea. So I grew up in a very white area. I also grew up in a household where my father was very much into business, and sadly, I lost my mum at a very young age. But I studied business studies first for GCSEs, and then that turned into A levels, which then turned into a BTEC National Diploma in Business. And every time I studied it, I loved the subject. I loved the fact that you could have HR, one minute you're having a class about marketing, the next minute you were having a class about finance, and it felt like several different subjects within a subject. So I loved that variety. Also, we did things like young enterprise at school. And then when I got to sort of college days, I was also heavily part of something called the Young Chamber of Commerce. So I was always around kind of businesses, being involved in speaking to local businesses within Exeter. And yeah, I think I just kind of got a bug for the subject, and then that's kind of what led me to decide to study it at Aston University. Aston was very much on the top of my list because they had a placement year as well. So I really wanted to make sure that within my degree, I had gone and got some work experience, which I kind of already knew that would put me ahead of maybe going to some of the other universities.
That's really interesting. And I wanted to also ask you about your time at Aston, relating to founding the Aston Women in Business Society, because that's been a big part of not only your journey at university, but your journey since, and becoming this advocate for women and entrepreneurship. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So during my placement year, which I did at Microsoft in sales, I got to the workplace. It was my first corporate job. I had my first job, I think, about 14, 15 when I did waitressing. But the first time I turned up at sort of Microsoft offices, working in a sales for FTSE 100 customers. And it was the first time I had seen that I'd gone from the classrooms where it had been 50-50 gender split to then going to the workplace and realizing, oh, hang on, I'm, one of the few women And then also, I'm one of the few women and people of color. And I think at that point, I kind of looked around and I was like, hang on a second, like, is this normal? And what I did is I was speaking to my other friends at Aston that were also on their placement years at Ernst & Young, IBM, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, picking up the phone, having these conversations about their experiences. And very much they had similar experiences. I also thought it was quite crazy that we had got to the age of 2021 and this topic had never been highlighted at university or at school about, and I'm talking about, I set up the society back in 2014. This was before Girls Can and all these other groups had started. It was kind of around the time that Beyonce came out with doing a concert, and then she had like feminism in the background. And it just started to become not as spoken about in the workplace. So I went to an amazing event in Canary Wharf where Lillian, one of the girls from Microsoft, had taken me across to. And right at the end of this Women in Tech conversation, they said, what can you go back and do in your communities to make a difference? And as soon as they said that in this beautiful building, I was like, okay, I know that everyone's also, in terms of the undergrads, are suffering with this and they don't know where to go, or it's a conversation that's not been had. Why don't we take it upon us to have this conversation? So the name was quite easy to come up with. Me and my best friend, Sheena, who was at IBM, she was the marketing, she whipped up a logo. We put it out on Facebook because Facebook was a big thing back then. And we were inundated with girls that were also on their undergrads or in second year that wanted to be part of this new society. They didn't know what they were signing up for. So we took it really properly. We did all the interviews, and we got our committee down to 7 of us having lots of different roles. And then we geared up for Freshers Fair. And at that point, we were getting pushback from people like the Student Union. We had guys coming across to the stall being like, where's the Men in Business Society? And I guess it was like the first time that we were having to kind of speak on behalf of like women in business. And the society followed 3 really simple concepts. The first one was to connect its members, make sure you have that kind of sisterhood of conversations. The second being sharing. So we brought women from corporate companies that had done really well, had gone down that trodden path and broke those glass ceilings to come in and share their experiences and to talk to us.
Mm.
And then the last one, aspiring, like where are the members now and where do they want to be and how can we help them on that journey? And I'm really proud to say that we've got our 10th anniversary this September. It's still running, which I guess is a good and a bad thing. It's good because it means that we started with this seed idea, we've grown it into touching many hearts of women, but the downside is that it's a topic that sadly the data and the stats aren't getting any better. We're making little movements, but it still needs to exist. And I always say that the success of the society is when it's no longer needed. But it's been incredible because I've stayed very close to it for coming up to 10 years because I get to see the amazing members that go through it. And actually, when those committee members and all through those years they've gone and done a year with the society, or some have actually served on for 3 years, the whole of their university, they've been heavily involved with it. They then go into their corporate companies, which are in central London and all over the world, and then they start joining women's networks for those organizations and they start making real tangible changes. And I'm a little bit of a nosy person. We touch base and they tell me all the stories about, "Oh, you never guess what it's really like here, Sharena." And so whilst I'm not working in corporate anymore, I get to stay and kind of live through the experiences and the changes that they're making. And we have a great little alumni group for everyone that's kind of been through it. So yeah, very, very close to my heart. I guess it was the first time I got to try an idea out, and I worked with such an amazing founding committee to bring this idea to light and to make this change. So yeah, I guess it was the first time I tried an idea out.
That's really fascinating. And I think it's really interesting hearing about how what you were saying about the fact that it's so important because like it's survived a decade, but it's also kind of sad that it's like still a need 10 years on. And I want to ask about your personal journey with how has it been for you, like navigating being a woman and a woman of color, and like how have you seen progress in the last decade? How have you gone and worked through the challenges that have you faced dealing with being a woman of color in business
Mm.
and then also in entrepreneurship and starting your own business because that is extremely daunting.
Mm.
So can you tell us a bit more about your personal journey?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that comes to light is after starting the society in my final year, I applied for a bunch of jobs and I ended up working with what was then called the Royal Bank of Scotland, they're now called the NatWest Group. And I worked in my first rotation in real estate finance. My second rotation was Alison Rose. She was one of the first female CEOs to run a British high street bank and an amazing role model. And then my third rotation was in private wealth. So I guess when I joined the bank, so I'd obviously had the stint in technology. I'm now at this bank that did things very differently to what Microsoft did. They were all pushing agile working, bean bags. And then I would go to the bank and it would be like fax machines and, emails, and it just meetings were done completely different. So I would say as a woman, when I was working in the bank, I was kind of looking at a bit more of the data because we were working on the Alison Rose in my second rotation, the female entrepreneurship paper. And I was really privileged to go up and down the country to the different entrepreneurship hubs and see female entrepreneurs be really excited about what they were doing. But then when I come back and we would look at the data or just kind of look at the organization as a whole, I was like, wow, these stats are really shocking. And it was amazing that you had someone like Alison Rose that was really behind this and pushing it. And she put some big targets forward for the bank to change. And I really feel like NatWest led and paved the way in London for lots of other companies to follow suit. So I felt in one hand really proud to be working for this kind of forward thinking bank, but at the same time, I guess whilst I was doing my grad scheme, I was having a bit of an internal conversation about where's my journey, what do I want to do next, how am I going to grow and develop as a person, and kind of moving on to my direction. I was living with some entrepreneurs in London at the same time. They owned an online beer subscription company. So I was kind of going to work, working with some of these entrepreneurs that were really fired up about their jobs. I was going home. I was living with these like high energetic, startup energy and like eavesdropping on all of their conversations that sometimes they were having from home. And I was like, how do I do that? How do I get involved with that? And I knew I'd studied business and management to kind of one day have my own business. But my flatmate, his name's Andrew, they started Honest Brew. He told me if there's 5 consecutive days that you are doing a job and you don't feel like yourself or you're not enjoying it, you're probably not doing the right thing. And I honestly think that's like the most important piece of advice I think I've ever received in my life. And what he meant by that is absolutely fine as an entrepreneur to be like not enjoying Monday, but Tuesday's all right, Wednesday's all right, Thursday's kick ass, Friday's bad. Like you're gonna have bad days. That's totally normal. But if you're consecutively not enjoying that, sorry, I completely understand not answering the question, but I think that
No, I think I think that's amazing advice, and I'm definitely going to use that in my future. I was like think while you were saying that, I was thinking that about my own life, and I was like, ah, gotta drop that class probably.
Absolutely.
So
And when he said
continue.
that, that was the trigger point for me to be like, right, okay, I need to go and I need to go and discover what I need to do, where I'm going to be, how I'm going to live my life. And I handed in my resignation in January. I didn't know where I was going to be going, what I was going to be doing. Packed up my Olympic Village Stratford flat, which I'd really enjoyed living in, and I moved back home to my dad. I remember picking up the phone and being like, "Hi, Dad, I think I'm coming home. I'm leaving this job." And like his first words was, "You didn't last very long in London." Because it had always been this massive dream to work and live in London, being this countryside girl who lived 3 hours away, you know, proper countryside, to then coming to this big, amazing city. Um, So how gender has then played a part in kind of my work side is now I run a property management company. Um, Also being female and young, I grew up kind of learning how to do a lot of DIY at home. I think I previously told you I worked at an estate agency since the age of 17, and I was exposed to all parts of this estate agency, everything from the sales, the letting, the auction side, the marketing, the finance. They're an amazing, one of the award-winning Southwest estate agencies in Exeter. And when I decided to set up by myself, I was converting family homes into shared housing. And I definitely would say that gender played a part because some of the contractors that I would get out to quote on jobs, wouldn't think that I knew what they were talking about, or I would say, just basically thought I was too young, or maybe it was my dad, business, this, that, and the other. And I would say, that was quite rife and apparent that I was never kind of taken seriously in that. I would also say, which I guess is a good or a bad thing, but also my age. I think some people don't know my age, and don't need to go around with a t-shirt with what my age is. Um, but I think sometimes not taking like a young female seriously, I think that's also played out as
Mhm.
a big part. And actually, that's also been quite common with some of the people I've interviewed on the podcast, as well. They've kind of told me similar experiences. I'm like, what do you need me to have gray hair and wrinkles to be taken seriously? Do you need me to like turn up in like uniform and scruffs in order for you to know how to put a partition wall up or to get a quote on a kitchen and this and that? So I would say I've definitely had those kind of like some microaggressions and some really obvious, when I get a quote back and I know I'm thinking, hang on a second, I already know that job's going to cost 1,000 and you've quoted me 3,000, like, and then I kind of pick them up and I love playing the game where I'm like, oh, so tell me what you're going to be doing for it. And, they're kind of, I love like playing games with them almost for them to trip up with. I'm like, that step's not even needed. Da, da, da. So instead of like looking at it all bad, doom and gloom, sometimes I can have a bit of fun with it as well. And I guess I've been aware of my gender being different. But I think if someone's going to do something like that, they've just ruled themselves out of business and they've just wasted their own time. Because equally for every couple of idiots that there's also been some really good non-cowboy contractors to work with.
That's really interesting. And before we touch more on your company and the journey and like what you do, I want to go back to what you said about your dad saying that you didn't last very long in London. Because I think taking the step of leaving your secure job and everything that you kind of like, I think in the UK there's this whole conventional pathway. If you go to university, you get a good job and like that's successful, right? And so like doing that, like getting into the pipeline, doing 4 years of university, and then getting a job at NatWest, which is really prestigious company, and then deciding to leave. Like, even though you did that for yourself, did you have to overcome any shame in like justifying your decision to yourself and to other people? And like, not only how did you overcome the shame, but how did you give yourself the strength and courage that like it's gonna be okay, like I will figure it out. Especially if you don't have like a backup to fall on.
I thank you so much for asking that question because this is a really like good one and something I think about often. First of all, my dad is amazing at giving me these one-liners in life. I remember when I got into Cambridge, it was like the biggest success, and he goes, "Yeah, that's fine, you've got in, but you haven't graduated yet." He's like, and I swear, if he had social media, he would so get cancelled with some of the stuff he says. But it comes from a good place. It's all out of love, and there was nothing malice about him saying, "Oh, you didn't last long." He wasn't wrong, right? Like I didn't even finish the 2 years of the grad scheme, and I decided to leave.
It was less about him and more about you
Yeah.
because I think like when you hear that from your parents, like even if it's coming from a loving place or a joking place, like you probably already have your own internalized shame, and then hearing that from someone that you want like validation from can be quite difficult.
Definitely. And I think um So definitely there was a lot of, I don't know what I'm doing next. There was a lot of, there was a few ideas that I had trialed that hadn't worked out. There was loads of knockbacks. And it was like, what path am I going down? When is it going to happen? You know, the internet told me that you become this success overnight. No one tells you that leaving London, where all of my friends from Aston had then come to do their corporate jobs in London, and all of a sudden I'm moving back home and I'm not having those Thursday, Friday drinks. I can't meet up with everyone so often because I'm having to work. Like, that was the stuff that was like naive, that I didn't know I was walking into. And I guess maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because if I had known that, I probably would have stayed in a job that I didn't necessarily like and love. Um, but what I saw as a privilege is I could go home and I could live rent free whilst I figured it out in a loving home. And I'm saying that's a place of privilege. You might be thinking, oh, well, most people can do that. Not everyone does get a chance to do that. And the sacrifice I took is actually, I knew I was going to have to dig deep and work really hard for those years, and sacrifice not being at every friend's birthday party, not holidaying 5, 6 times a year and buying the new designer handbags that what I saw everyone in corporate doing. But I knew I was building something for the future, and I was doing it for myself ultimately. Um, I would also say I actually didn't tell a lot of people what I was going to do. I didn't update my LinkedIn for about 2 or 3 years. I didn't make the business a website, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in a minute. I basically built in the dark. And it wasn't really till I started the podcast, which was 4 years later, that I announced to the world on the internet what I had been doing and my journey. And that in itself, you know, the first time I made a www.sharena.co.uk and sat there and wrote my bio was the time when I started to believe I was an entrepreneur. But there was so much self-doubt, despite making a profit and making a business, that I wasn't ready to call myself an entrepreneur. Could just about spell the word, you know. So um there was so much imposter syndrome, and there still is, and that's okay. I've come to terms with that. But having the podcast and being able to talk a bit more about my journey, having opportunities like this, is like, yeah, I have built something, and that's what it takes to start a business, you know.
100%, and you've built something amazing, and I feel very privileged to be able to share that with the audience. But I want to touch more on what you said about the FOMO side, because I think it's
Mm.
a really important sacrifice that you decided that you made. But like, how how did you continue to make that sacrifice day in, day out? Because it's easy to make the decision once, but like you said, you missed birthdays, you missed holidays, you missed what everyone else was doing. And I think it's really hard because like if you've been in the traditional education system, you go to school and then you go straight to university. And so basically for like almost 2 decades of your life, you're compared directly to everyone of your age, and you're basically set on par and you're doing the exact same things, and the difference is like what grades are we getting, and that's the only kind of metric that you're using. And then you leave university and everyone starts doing different things, but there's still this kind of what everyone's doing, and like, am I behind, am I ahead, like comparison and what you should be doing. And how did you navigate this idea of like should and FOMO, and like, am I doing the right thing? Am I missing out? Like, will it all work out? Um,
Mm.
how was that?
Yeah, I mean, it was there, it was present every single day. Sometimes it's still present, and now I get to shape the day how I want. I can add in 7 other fun projects that I want to do. Um, I think we all need to get comfortable with having it all figured out, and that, and I did inverted comma, it there's no such thing as having it all figured out, and you're never gonna be at the destination that you want to be at, and even when you reach that destination, you're gonna miss the journey, you know. So it's just about showing up present every day. When I was starting the business, and even on the tough days, I was like, what was getting me through it is the future that I was building for myself and my future family. Another part of the story is my dad was back in Exeter by himself, living by himself. My brother had moved out, and I don't openly going around and share it. That was another pull for me wanting to be back down south, because as our parents get older and they live by themselves, I was like, I want to be present for him, you know? And so it's not just like a business choice, it's also like a life and how I see my future, and knowing that if I personally had worked in a corporate job and God forbid something happened at home, I would have to take annual leave. And I don't know if that enough of that annual leave would have given me a time to show up how I need to show up at home. And again, not everybody has to worry about an aging single parent, and hats off to them. But these were some of the conversations I was having. So through time, through those FOMO times, just kind of always reminding myself what I'm doing for it at the end of the day, like what was the goal of doing this in the first place. I'm super competitive. I set myself goals. So, I wanted to prove that I was ticking off the goals that I wanted to do. And I feel like life is really precious. I feel like we have to enjoy what we do, and I'm enjoying, was and still am enjoying the property side and having the creative freedom. I definitely felt at the bank sometimes I was wanting to run and do things on projects, and being the youngest I was kind of confined to, you can only do XYZ task, and not really feeling fulfilled from it. I get super excited every time a tenant wants to move into one of the houses. I get really excited every time a new property comes onto the portfolio. I I think, just reminding yourself that you're enjoying what you're doing, you're enjoying the journey, was what kept me going. And then I also had a good group of friends that understood that, Sharena isn't, always got the what's the word, disposable income that she would have had, and working through that. And now things have changed, and yeah, so I think having a good group of friends that understand that, good family support that understand that you're not taking the conventional route, and ultimately I surrounded myself with mentors that reminded me every day why I was doing this as well. And I owe a lot of my success to just people that gave me a little tap on the shoulder, and still do, going, what your purpose is, why you're doing this, like, keep going. And I think, that's kind of, and some recognitions along the way is also quite nice, and opportunities to have conversations like this, right?
100%. Thank you for sharing that. And I also want to ask about the whole, you said building in the dark. So
Mm.
now that you're not in the dark anymore, can you please tell us about what that journey was? Like how did you start this company? Like what did you do? Like can you talk us through the process, the challenges, some of the rewarding moments? Just give us the rundown.
Yeah, definitely. So um basically I had several different jobs from a young age. I worked in catering, my friend's wedding catering business. I worked in retail from a very young age. And I found both of the first two experiences environments that I didn't necessarily feel very comfortable in, due to, I guess, some of the colleagues that I worked with. So I grabbed what was called the yellow pages back then. I flicked through it and I was like, I'm going to work either in car dealerships or estate agencies. I don't even know how estate agencies came into my head. Called a bunch of these numbers, was like, hi, I lied and said, oh, I need to do 2 weeks work experience. Can I come in? And basically got down to like 2 interviews for estate agencies. The lovely Emma from Wilkinson Grant invited me in. We had a great coffee and she said, yeah, that's fine. You can start on Monday. I did the 2 weeks with them. And at the end, the owner of the estate agency popped by, Roger Wilkinson, and said, we're really looking for a Saturday girl. Would you be interested in some part-time work? And I was like, yes. So Saturday girl became summer holidays girl. And I pretty much did that every time, all the way through even my undergrad university. I'd go back, I would work religiously for 3-4 months, save up all that money, and then go back to university and spend the money. And I even did that just before I started Microsoft. So I had basically worked within the estate agency for 7 years before even thinking about my own. It was really amazing that I was then put in the real estate finance team at NatWest, and again got to understand more about the commercial side. And I told you a little bit about kind of growing up with a father who taught me how to paint, decorate, tile. My dad refused to pay anyone to do any labor. um, which meant that I kind of grew up thinking everybody knew how to paint, decorate, tile, how to put up a partition wall. And I spent my Saturdays and summer holidays just doing DIY. So it's great it's come in handy. Otherwise, it's just like free child labor. But that being said, I then, when I was thinking about what business idea I wanted to focus on, I started looking into the beauty industry in Exeter. And as soon as I found out how much the rates for rent were in a high street store, that quickly wasn't an avenue I was going to go down. I looked at a couple of other online, maybe I could buy something from China, put it on the internet. And again, I was like, I have zero skills on how to sell online. But what I did know and what I already had in my toolkit, pardon the pun, was working in estate agencies. I'd also been a tenant. I'd been a tenant for several years before living in Birmingham and London. And I knew that Devon as a whole is a very aging population. People kind of go down there because it's beautiful and they retire. But you've also got this subsection of people who kind of just graduated from university. They're working at places like the Met Office or EDF Energy or the hospital, and they need shared housing. And you're probably nodding, going, that's quite normal for like Birmingham and Exeter and shared housing. That's been around for ages. But there was a low stock of that in Exeter. And the risk of that is you are basically matchmaking and putting random people into homes and fingers crossed that it's all going to work out. And the estate agency I worked at only focused on single contracts to families or individuals. And what I effectively did was got my first property on board through friends that were investing in the Southwest and living away. And I'd say, look, you're going to get £700-800 for the whole house from a family that's going to rent it. But if we split it into 3 rooms, we do all the bills, we put locks on the doors. Again, nothing super science, nothing too difficult. This is the upside and the return we could get on it. And I guess through my time of working in corporate, I really understood about relationship building. I kind of tapped into people I already knew that were investing in the Southwest, landlords with large portfolios, and just proving that I could do 1 or 2 houses, showing them the upside, matchmaking, doing and looking after everything from getting people into the house and advertising it through to managing their whole tenancy. And once you can do it once, twice, thrice, it just kind of builds on that. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing with devotion property management for the last 7 and a bit years now. So yeah.
That's super fascinating. And I think it's really interesting how, like, looking back, or you used like all the dots from your life, like all of your different skills and experiences and connections to create this like unique idea and business that like combined everything. And
Can I just
speaking,
add something there? Because I really want people to understand. I know they say like starting a business is really difficult, and I get it. It's scary, but like you don't need to look for something that you don't already have in your skill set or that isn't, it's about doing things and doing it slightly better. So when I'm speaking to my tenants, when I'm thinking about decorating a house, I'm thinking, what would Sharena want to live in? What kind of bed and mattress, what kind of amenities in the living room? And I think it's just about keeping things simple and not thinking, because originally I was thinking maybe I need to create a new app. Maybe I need to think about something in the fintech, health tech, and going, actually, you have zero skills in any of these sectors. So stop complicating it and doing something simple. So yeah, just wanted to add that part.
I love that. I think that really helps because I think, again, like right now, we live in the era of the internet where everyone wants to start a side hustle on YouTube. And this is like a whole pressure of like becoming a millionaire in your 20s and all this stuff. And it's inspiring, but it can also become really daunting if you want to start. So I think it's really nice to like kind of start with what you know. Like you're not starting at zero. If you think about it, you're starting with whatever your unique life experiences, connections give you. So I think that's really, really, really cool. And speaking of connections, I want to ask you now about your podcast. So can you tell us about Start Up Start Now?
Amazing. So yeah, we found ourselves back in 2020, 2019, 2020, going into one of the most scariest times of our lives, with there being a global pandemic. And during that time, I was still running the property business. A lot of my tenants at the time were people from the Met Office, and we had Flybe, an airline down there, and a lot of people were going back to their respective countries. So literally everything that could have been shaken had been shaken, and times were changing. And I use Instagram quite a bit, LinkedIn, and at the time, lots of people were adding me to new like pages that they had started of businesses or side hustles, as you said. I was like, oh, hang on, Sally in finance has now decided to create a painting company. And I didn't know that she was super artistic. Or, my friend Joe, who's decided to plant stuff and post it to people's houses. And I'm going, oh my God, I didn't know everyone had these talents and I only knew them for their day jobs. So I was like, this is really cool. People are starting side hustles and businesses. How can I help them on the journey? Because I've been doing this for the last 4 years and I've been listening to a lot of American podcasts. I've been reading books on it. I've been walking the walk. And how can I bring a collection of British entrepreneur conversations to these people, my friends? So I spent about 2 months kind of researching podcasting, how it would work. I maybe thought about like a YouTube channel at the time. I thought about names, and my good friend Sheena, who works at Delivery and Marketing, we sat down with a whole list. And do you remember the time where Boris Johnson was saying like, wash your hands? Well, it was like 3 commands. It was like, stay inside, wash your hands, wear a mask, or whatever. I can't even remember what the three things were. And I was like, we found a name which basically was like Startup Start Now with the dots, and the dots was because that's what um we were being told by the government at the time. So Startup Start Now very much started in the pandemic. It was to bring a collection of conversations. I didn't have a lot of entrepreneurial friends, but what I did is the friends that I did know, I started to interview all of them. So I had a guy in the year above me, his name is Gian Power. He started something called TLC Lions. It is a group of people that go into corporate that talk about their lived experiences around mental health. And sadly, Gian had lost his father through to a murder in India. And this was like an amazing, good, like a good business in terms of he goes into workplaces and they talk about very real stories to kind of understand, and how we created a business that through something that had been very sad that had happened. I'd also interviewed a barber who was a barber to people like Stormzy's, Anthony Joshua, LeBron James, the list is ridiculous and ludicrous. And I'm like, okay, there's one thing being a barber, but how do you get all those clients? And basically, I sit on the conversation and I have the interviews in the same way. I don't think anyone just wakes up and becomes an entrepreneur. There's this whole host of journey that someone's been on, which then gets them to where they are. And I think the power of storytelling is really important. So we're now season 7, which is amazing. I've been really lucky to speak to people like Ben Francis, Stephen Bartlett, who else? I mean, the founder of Hotel Chocolat, Pippin Nut, What Three Words, Just Eat. Just amazing, amazing British entrepreneurs that are doing incredible things day in, day out. And I get to sit and pick their brains. And even if no one listened to any of the episodes, I just feel so inspired every conversation. But really happy to say that the podcast is in 135 countries now, which is phenomenal. And yeah, it's about 51% female listenership. And I try to take people with like all different stories. So whether it's jewelry business, whether you're an artist, as I said, a barber, mental health, like topics that aren't just, fintech and health tech. And when you think of entrepreneurship, they're the kind of things that come to mind. Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to link what you just said about like trying to get diverse types of entrepreneurs to what you said earlier about it taking you 4 years to call yourself an entrepreneur, on your website and on the internet. So you have, I'm assuming, interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs now, like at this point. Are there any common threads of what you think is the entrepreneur identity what are the
Mm.
qualifications? Like when you have a job, it's like so and so person would have like such and such
Mm.
qualification. What is an entrepreneur? Like, what is an entrepreneur identity?
I love that. Okay, so I've never been asked this question. So I think the common theme is all of these people want to change the world, and they're very sure that they want to change the world in whatever capacity they can make that change. A lot of them say that they enjoy the journey and the bit at the end, the success, the winner, what successfully looks like to everyone else isn't quite what they thought and dreamt. So for instance, when Ben Francis was talking about Gymshark, and he was talking about how he signed the deal, he was going to become the first unicorn. He's the youngest billionaire in the world. I was like, oh, what was that moment like? Because I was like the young Sharena, like looking into his business. He was like, honestly, it was like anticlimactic. I signed a piece of paper, it went on for months, and then we were done, and then we just enjoyed a pizza. And all of a sudden you think, and again, you alluded to it earlier about how glamorized this kind of entrepreneurship. And he's like, he really enjoys his early days when he was, screen printing onto his t-shirts and so forth. So I think these are the kind of conversations. I would also say when I speak to female entrepreneurs, we see all the data and the stats around the lack of funding. We have those open conversations on the podcast. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. And I'm being told time and time and time and time again, the lack of funding, some of the questions that they're asked by people that are looking to invest in them, that they just categorically would not be asked by the male counterparts, just wouldn't be asked the same questions. What else would I say is quite common? Nobody's really, so I asked this question at the end, which is like, what do you want to be remembered for? And I've been trying to look for a theme, but they're all very different. So like everyone's on their own kind of like journey with it, but mostly it's impactful. And maybe that's slightly because I tend to interview entrepreneurs that are doing things around. Do you know what the B Corporation is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the Give Good. So a lot of them want to do that. And again, if I was starting a new business tomorrow, if it didn't follow the B Corp rules, it just wouldn't start it in the first place. And if you don't know what B Corp is, guys, like please go and research it. Yeah.
Um, that's really fascinating. And I will link some resources when I make the show notes on like what a B Corp is for anyone who's listening and doesn't know what it is. But you said that you spent 2 months planning what a podcast is. For me, for making this podcast, it took me a year to really like sit down and not just like learn to edit and record and stuff, but like think about like what I wanted to do. So can you tell us more about the process of like how it went from idea to now one of the top like 1% podcasts in the world?
Definitely. So the whole point in Start Up, Start Now is we also spend a lot of time thinking about what we want to do. We sit on ideas. You clearly had an idea, you brought it to fruition now. And hence we're having this conversation. But at one point there was a possibility that you could have just dismissed this idea. And then sadly, what happens in future years, you live with regret because someone goes and does the same podcast, and you're like, oh, and what good is life when you go, oh, that person did it. And the difference between them creating it is the fact that they just got up and got it done, and it's and they consistently showed up for it. So I was really clear that I wanted to help my community in some way by having these conversations and share not the glamorized stuff, but kind of the journeys that these individuals have been on. How I went about starting it was I didn't know how to edit a podcast. I didn't know where you would even go and think about hosting a podcast. I thought maybe you have to go and put it on all your different Apple channels, your Spotify, your Amazon, all of these things. And good old Google. Good old Google came to the rescue. And, I don't have any experts. I didn't have any friends that podcasted at the time. And I just Googled and YouTubed my way through learning how to edit, what hosting platform to use. I used Canva for the first time to create my mock-up of my image. I paid for a mic. I paid about £100 for a mic, which was quite good. I also, during lockdown, hired a friend who took some photos in a park, which is now the leading headshot. And, we had to have all those distance and the masks and all of that stuff. And then I just got to it, and I just, with conviction, was like, had a pre-call with every guest, would write the questions, would then send it to them. And instead of spending too much time thinking about doing it, I was just like, do it. And a lot of people say, do you pay your guests? I've never paid a single guest, and I never will going forward, because this is a platform to share your journey, to inspire who effectively was their younger selves, because they were in that position at one point. And if you don't want to do that, then that's fine. And for every successful person you see me that I have spoken to, there's probably 10 rejection emails that I've received. You only on social media and on the podcast see the success parts. You don't see the sorry, ain't got time, not today, that kind of not of interest, or it just ends up in their junk mail and it never gets anywhere. But persistency is so important. I interviewed the founder of Grenade Bar. I reached out to him on LinkedIn first. LinkedIn then turned into voice noting him. Voice noting him years later turned into interviewing Alex Partridge, the founder of Uni Lad and Lad Bible, who then was like, you need to interview Alan. And I was like, I've been trying to work on Alan for years. And then he put us in touch. Boom, it ended up happening. But that was a lead that I'd worked on for 3 years. And again, I come from a sales background. It's important you have a pipeline. I think it's really important that anyone that has never had a stint working in sales, go and do some work experience in sales. Like, it is so important. It's a life skill we all need, regardless whether you're a business owner or not a business owner. And yeah, I think it's just consistently showing up for something you really care about. And I deeply care about teaching as many people about starting businesses. I'm really lucky I get to go back to my first university and teach on the entrepreneurship module for master's students. I've been doing that now for nearly 4 years. So yeah.
That's awesome. And before we touch more on like the recognition aspect, because I want to dive more into the fact that now you're teaching at the university that you went to, and you're teaching something that you've clearly done your like, as Malcolm Gladwell likes to talk about, the whole 10,000 hours. You've clearly done that. I want to ask, when you were talking about the whole process, it reminded me of the whole process of doing this and how I made this podcast, and how me and my friend were in my apartment and we were like trying to use different colored candy wrappers on like cellophane stuff on lights to try and create the background. And I remember, and I was smiling while you were talking about the story, because I remember how fun it was,
Yeah.
and how it's so important to find joy in the process, like you said, because like what you were saying about Gymshark, if there's no joy in the process, the outcome is not the joyful part. You kind of get like a bit desensitized to it by the time you reach the outcome, if the process isn't fun. And the process isn't fun every day, like you said earlier, which is why I think your whole 5-day consecutive rule is so important. But I want to ask you, what is the most joyful part of your work as a podcaster, as entrepreneur, and just a multi-hyphenate woman that you are, and everything that you do?
Oh, thank you. First of all, that is very kind of you to say. Um, I enjoy all aspects, and I enjoy the variety that I have in life. I think too much of just property management means I'm probably not using my creative side, and too much of my creative side means I'm not making enough money. So they all need to go very much hand in hand. They all need to be taken care of. Um, and I'm not even going to sit here and pretend like I have it together all the time. Like, if you ask me, I've not put an episode out for the last 4 weeks because I've just run the London Marathon. I've just had my dad's 70th birthday. And then I've just taken some annual leave for the first time in 2024. Am I kicking myself for it? Slightly, but also, work hard, play hard is a big part of my life and my ethos. So I don't want to seem like it's all together all the time. There was a time at Cambridge when I was having to turn in dissertations and I couldn't show up regularly for the podcast. And it's so funny, when I first started the podcast, they used to go out Sunday 7 o'clock. I used to like kick myself if it went out at like 7:02. I would miss. I make a Sunday roast at home. And, I would not have dinner on a Sunday because I was like so focused on making sure all the parts of the podcast was put out. And now it's like I choose when I can be creative, and it takes one poor conversation to lose listeners. So I'm all about quality over quantity. And I show up in that way. What's the most exciting part about all I do is the fact that I can work in the freedom of when I want to work. So I build a lot of my life around going to the gym, and exercising and having movement in my day. Obviously, there was a lot of movement in devotion property management. It's not a desk job. I sit and I go to the houses and I'm checking on everything. Start Now has become a lot more of a desk job. I respond to emails daily. I get contacted about X, Y, and Z. So the movement, so building my day around kind of the gym, I think the freedom to have that opportunity is something that's really important, and I don't have to wait to go at busier times and things like that. But yeah, I guess I just enjoy it. I'll keep showing up for it as long as I enjoy it, and when I don't enjoy it, I will switch it up and I will try something else. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing how the joy can change as well from time to time. I want to talk more about movement because you've mentioned it before, but you just ran the London Marathon, and this is your second time running the London Marathon. So can you first tell us about the journey of like why you decided to run it in the first place, and then talk us all through the process of doing it not once but twice, and like yeah, your motivation, your process, and how you feel now.
Amazing. So basically, I was that kid at school that hated PE. I have asthma. I would use the asthma card wherever possible, and anything to get out of joining in, to the point where sports days, I used to do javelin. I was probably the shortest, smallest person representing my tutor class doing javelin, just so I did a sport and then I can sit and socialize and be with all of my friends and see everything they're doing. The reason I decided to start running back in about, I think, 2019 is, when I was living in London and even at university, I had a gym membership, but I just wouldn't go. Like 3 times a year would be me thinking that was amazing. It was ridiculous. So when I moved back home and I wasn't getting much movement, guess what? The older you get, the more weight you put on. And I realized I was starting to feel quite sluggish. I used to see people running around my area at home. And I always used to go, that's really interesting what they're doing there. How do they do that? How does one run? How can you breathe whilst running? Little silly things. And one day I was like, okay, let me just get out and walk their route, or walk a small route. And I just kept showing up consecutively, like for 3, 4 times, um, walking that route, which then turned into, I'm gonna walk 1K, jog 1K, walk 1K. So I do this like 3 kilometer route, and I consistently did it. And then I would like push myself and add another kilometer onto it and another. And before I knew it, after about 8 weeks, I was able to jog certain parts of that course. And what I realized through doing all of this, of course, I got slightly quicker, I got slightly fitter, but it was the showing up every week and making the time to get out for that walk or jog. It was never about what time I was going to do it in, XYZ. And then basically the opportunity to run the Race for Life 5K challenge. It was like a tough mudder. I signed up with one of my best friends, and I did it in memory of my late mum, who passed away when I was 4 to cancer. We raised some money, which was amazing. That then turned into another tough mudder 10K. And I realized out of everyone, I took part with about 8 people, I was the slowest, I was the most unfit. And again, I think you've probably got from this conversation, I like a bit of competition. I like to be good at things. I was like, how do I improve? And in order to improve, most people go 10K to, oh, let's just stick at the 10K mark. I was like, I'm going to sign up for a half marathon. So with another friend, we got into the Great North Run. And sadly, that year, COVID hit. It was the same time I was going to Cambridge, but I had already raised about £1,000 for cancer research. And I wasn't going to let those individuals down. So I'd moved to Cambridge to start my master's. The first day, they had asked us to introduce our name, who we were, and an interesting fact about myself. And I said to the class, guys, I'm going to be running a half marathon on Sunday, which is meant to be the Great North Run. If anyone wants to join, feel free. Out of my class of 60, 8 of them ran the half marathon with me. My new flatmate, who had only known for a week, cycled the route, so we knew the route. And it was just one of those days that I'll like never forget. Like strangers showed up for me. They came together, wasn't a massive runner. 3 of them completed the whole half marathon with me. People came in and did 10K stint. And then we went to a pub and we had a lovely roast dinner. And I shared all of it on social media. And it was just so beautiful. We raised a ton of money for charity. Every year after that, I've just tried to do a little competition like that. So I did another further 2 Cambridge half marathons. And then I got into London Marathon off the back of raising so much money for cancer research. And I did my first marathon, which was in 2022. Wow, what a day. It was the toughest thing I'd ever done, but a beautiful day. Showed up and enjoyed all of it. That then led me to I took a year off running, and when I'm not running, it's fine, but it seems to be a bit of an anchor. It's a bit of escapism from the desk. I can go out, listen to a podcast, and then just did London Marathon for Home Start, which is a very special charity close to my heart. They actually came to our family's rescue when we lost mum. So it was, being a bit vulnerable, kind of showing up online and sharing that story. And over the few years, I think it definitely has helped, like giving back and keeping really important people's memories alive. I would say, so running's been incredible. And I'm not a runner, I'm not that asthmatic. I'm still asthmatic, but just try and show up where possible. I think it's still crazy when people can run 5K in 30 minutes. Like I could be that person, but I don't really push myself to be that person. I want to enjoy it. I want to do things injury free. And hopefully, in the last one, I just tried to take people on the journey of all the training you need to do in order to do a marathon. So that's also been quite fun to share that online.
Wow, there's so much to unpack. And before we talk more about your training and this marathon that you just ran and Homestar and the journey more, I want to touch more on what you said. Like you said, I'm not a runner, but I'm still asthmatic. Or no, I am a runner. And also I want to link that back to what we were saying about the identity of an entrepreneur, because I'm not on the same place in my running journey as you. But honestly, like looking at your stories made me realize like there was a time during the pandemic where I did the couch to 5K because it was your one opportunity to leave the house to do your 30 minutes of exercise. So I started doing it, and I never identified as a sporty person. I have a brother. He is the sporty member of our family. I was always asthmatic. I have dyspraxia. So sports like was never my territory. And I always felt like there was never space for me in sports. And I think in school, in PE, I was always scared of like letting other people down in group sports by being the incapable one. So I just like went as soon as I could, I started going to the gym. But like you said, I didn't really take the gym seriously and consistently because it was always centered around image rather than ability. And I know that that's not what the gym is, but that's what it was for me from a young age. And then um doing running, and like you've been doing it for years now and building up slowly, like how at what point did you like adopt the identity of a runner? And if you haven't still, what like how has running shaped your identity, you know?
I'm laughing because, I mean, I don't know what a few people have said to me, because I still don't class myself as a runner. They're like, right, so you do a couple of marathons and you've done quite a few half marathons, but you're not calling yourself a runner. I just need to get over it, don't I? I just need to identify as a runner. I just think it's because maybe I'm a runner. There we go. I'm not even going to try and justify my way out of it. I think do what's ever in your mean. I mean, it came to me in my late 20s. It's showing up more in my 30s. I think it's a really good way for balancing kind of business, mental health. I think, yeah, just kind of any kind of movement. It doesn't need to be running. You could really enjoy dance classes, you could really enjoy yoga, Pilates, whatever it is. And there is a bit of a wave now. I feel like we go through all of these fads on social media, and running does seem to be the thing. And it just happens to be that I've caught the wave for it. My friends keep sending me this meme. It's like, when you're over 30, you're either getting married, what was it, having children, or running marathons. And I very much tick the last box, and having not done the two higher boxes. So I would say don't be so hard on yourself. Like, if that is how you might feel that you express yourself in a completely different way, which is like a creativity output, and maybe that brings you joy, maybe listening to the right kind of music, maybe reading joyous books. I still stand by some kind of movement is important in all humans, because the way we're going is just awful, being stuck behind technology, but that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, I would just say don't be so hard on yourself. Just show up in whatever capacity you literally can. And I mean, I'm just going to identify more as a runner after this conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. Before we move on to closing off, I want to talk more about the process. So can you tell us more about Homestar and the charity, and then also the journey itself and the training that you went through, and not just the physical side, but the mental aspect of it?
Amazing. So Homestar are a charity very close to my heart. They are an amazing national organisation, which now I'm really proud to say I'm the UK ambassador for. And I'm also the trustee for a borough in London as well. Um, they basically go into families' homes when things are based around sort of mental health, bereavement, maybe financial difficulty, a multitude of places that families need support that have young children. And you've got these volunteers that go into these homes, that sit with parents and young children and have conversations that maybe you don't want to have with your friends or your family. And it's just someone who comes by your side in a time of need. And we had an amazing volunteer called Grandma Paula that came into our lives. We nicknamed her Grandma because, coming from sort of an Indian background, it's a form of respect. She was an ex-English teacher, and when she saw me sort of falling behind at school, she very much came in and started teaching English classes. She made like learning very fun at home. And all of a sudden, my English got better, my reading, and I was very behind at school with this. I definitely had so much self-doubt about even getting into university for undergrad, let alone being able to do a master's at a place like Cambridge. And sadly, well, she used to come into our homes when we were younger. And then when she was getting older and she was in her retirement home, we would then go and visit her. And it was an amazing relationship that probably should have only lasted about 6 months, a year tops. But, she basically saw us for the next 20 years. We were in each other's lives. And sadly, the day she passed, and when I got into Cambridge, I just wish I could have like picked up the phone and shared this good news with her. So I think that what the charity does is phenomenal. I think the volunteers that come behind it and help out and do it all for nothing is just, yeah, I'm just in awe of Homestart and everything that they do. And I will continue to kind of work alongside them for as long as possible.
Awesome. And I want to ask, juggling all of these hats of like running a marathon, and like being an ambassador for a cause that you really care about, and having your business and having a podcast and having your family and your social commitments, how do you manage your time and prevent yourself from like being burnt out, and like really making sure that you like give to all of the areas in your life that you care about, um, and make sure that it's time for yourself as well?
Mm. I think that's really important. I think I everything I do is done by the diary. I religiously live out of my diary and blocking time to show up in a space that I need to for that dedicated hour, hour and a half an hour, and being really present. I even pop in my calendar the time that I'm exercising. the holidays or the time I'm away and I'm with family. And I'm also not hard on myself. I mean, I live by a to-do list. They're great kind of, I get so much enjoyment from ticking things off. I also start the day knowing exactly, I journal in the morning and I know what the kind of top 3 or 4 outputs of the day that I need to get done. And anything thereafter is an absolute Brucey bonus. And I'm like over the moon when I can get there. But I also don't kick myself when things don't go that way, because that's life. Like, it's not always going to come together. It's not always going to be perfect. There are things that are going to slip, but I think communication, and that's communication with the clients that I have, that's communication with the friendships and the family that I have, that things are getting too much, I'm going to need to move this. And I think that's all like really important. I'm telling you really simple things, but some people find really hard to do. I think if you can, and as well, what I've loved since starting my own business is I show up as Sharena in, and one Sharena, whether it's my work, my personal life, here on the podcast. I don't have different personas for different things. I don't have a work Sharena attitude and a personal Sharena attitude. They're all one, and I'm actually quite lucky that it's a blessing and a curse, that what you see is what you get. So if I'm really down, you'll hear it, you'll feel it, you'll sense it. If I'm really excited, you'll hear it, you'll feel it, you'll sense it. So it's great that like friends and family and colleagues and everything can kind of see how I'm doing. And I recognize it in myself. I know that in the month there's going to be some good days, there's going to be some bad days. And I just try to work really hard on the days that I can really be creative and put out. And then I'm also, yeah, really human about it, that if I can't and something has happened in the personal life, then something's got to give. It can't always be perfect. It can't always work out the way that we want it to. And just recognizing that nothing's that important that it can't be bumped to next week or the week after. Prime example is this conversation. How many times have between us we've had to kind of change it, but I always knew it was going to happen at the right time, the right conversation, and nothing significant has happened by not having this any sooner. And that's just life. But if you communicate and you communicate well, all is good.
100%. Thank you for sharing that with us. And as we conclude our conversation, do you have anything else that you want the people to take away from our discussion? And how can listeners stay connected with you? I'm going to put all of your information in the bio, but just tell us as well.
Definitely. So please connect via LinkedIn, Instagram. It's just at Sharena Shiv. I'm always open for a coffee chat, a conversation, if I can help in any way possible, or at least point you in the right direction. No real takeaways other than just make sure as you navigate through life, you always pick yourself and you always pick what you enjoy, even when society is saying that's not quite normal, that's not conventional. If you genuinely have that burning desire to do something, be it go back to uni in your late 20s, 30s, 40s, and that's not deemed as conventional, just do it. If you decide you want to leave what appears to be one of the best banks in the UK to go and have a go at starting something, and you have the safety net to be able to do that, like, take a bet on yourself, because you won't let yourself down if you have true conviction in what you want to do. And also just realize life is really short. We can't be here to people please all the time. And those that want to join you on the journey will. And it's really important that they join you on the journey in the dark days and then get to celebrate the good days with you. They don't get to just have the good of you. So yeah, I hope that's kind of helped. And yeah, just wishing everyone success in any sort of direction of life they decide to take. And thank you for, it's been so lovely to meet you through the amazing networking event that we met. Yeah, it's just been so great to kind of get to this conversation, and the work that you're doing is so important in sharing these conversations. So yeah, I just wish you every success, hun.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. Please let me know your thoughts. We will be back next week on Wednesday with another solo episode, and following that, more interviews. So stay tuned and have a lovely rest of your week.